The stagecoach window shattered inward with a deafening crack, and Olivia Vaughn threw herself to the floorboards as bullets tore through the wooden panels above her head. 3 masked riders thundered alongside the lurching coach, their revolvers spitting fire and lead across the dusty Oklahoma plains. The driver's shotgun boomed twice before he slumped forward with a grunt, and the horses screamed as the coach careened wildly off the rutted trail. Olivia pressed her hands over her ears, but nothing could muffle the explosive violence that surrounded her. The other passengers shrieked and dove for cover as the bandits closed in, their shouts muffled by the bandanas covering their faces. The coach tipped dangerously, wheels striking a boulder. And suddenly, Olivia was airborne. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs, prairie dust filling her mouth and nose. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard boots hitting the dirt, heard men's voices barking commands. Strong hands grabbed her arms and hauled her upright, and she found herself staring into cold eyes above a dirty red bandana. Well now, what do we have here? The bandit's breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco. Pretty little thing, aren't you? Olivia tried to pull away, but his grip tightened painfully. She could feel herself trembling, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. The other passengers were being lined up, hands raised, while the bandits rifled through luggage and demanded valuables. An older woman was crying softly. A merchant in a fine suit protested until one of the outlaws struck him across the face with the butt of his pistol. "Please," Olivia managed, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't have anything valuable. I'm just traveling to Guthrie to work as a schoolteacher." "Maybe you're valuable enough just as you are," the bandit said, dragging her toward his horse. The gunshot came from nowhere, a sharp crack that echoed across the plains. The bandit holding Olivia jerked and stumbled backward, releasing her arm. She fell to her knees, gasping. 2 more shots followed in rapid succession, and the other bandits scattered, diving for cover behind the overturned coach and their horses. Olivia looked up, squinting through the dust and smoke, and saw him. He stood perhaps 100 yards away, a rifle held steady against his shoulder, perfectly still except for the slight movement as he tracked his targets. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that strained against his buckskin shirt. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord. Even at this distance, she could see the corded muscle in his forearms as he worked the rifle's lever action. The bandits fired back wildly, but their shots went wide. The big man didn't flinch, didn't hurry. He simply aimed and fired again, and another bandit cried out and clutched his shoulder. The remaining outlaws seemed to reach a silent agreement. They scrambled onto their horses and spurred them hard, racing away across the plains and leaving their wounded behind. Silence descended, broken only by the nervous whinnying of the coach horses and the soft sobbing of the older woman. The man with the rifle walked toward them with long, measured strides. Olivia noticed he moved with surprising quietness for someone so large, his moccasins barely stirring the dust. He kept the rifle ready, but pointed toward the ground. As he approached, Olivia got her first clear look at him. He appeared to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, with a strong jaw and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His eyes were a startling pale blue, almost gray, and they swept over the scene with calm assessment. He wore buckskin trousers and moccasins, a wide leather belt with a large knife sheathed at his side. Everything about him spoke of strength and capability. "Everyone all right?" His voice was deep and surprisingly gentle given his imposing appearance. The merchant nodded shakily. "Thanks to you, friend. They would have robbed us blind, or worse." The man's gaze settled on Olivia, still kneeling in the dust. Something flickered in those pale eyes. but his expression remained neutral. He approached slowly, then extended a hand to help her up. As she hesitated, her body still trembling from the attack, then placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but careful. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength, then released her hand immediately and stepped back, giving her space. "You hurt?" he asked quietly. Olivia shook her head, then realized she was still shaking all over. "No, I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for saving us." He nodded once, then turned his attention to the wounded driver, who had managed to sit up despite the blood staining his sleeve. "Let me see that." While he tended to the driver's wound with practiced efficiency, wrapping it with cloth torn from his own shirt, the merchant and the other male passenger worked to right the overturned luggage and check on the horses. Olivia stood to the side, trying to steady her breathing, trying to stop the trembling in her hands. "Coach axles cracked," the merchant announced grimly. "We're not going anywhere in this." "Guthrie's about 8 miles north," the big man said, finishing his bandaging. "I can help walk the horses there, get this sorted." 8 miles? The older woman moaned. "I can't walk 8 miles in this heat." "You can ride one of the horses, madam. Driver here too with that arm." He straightened, and for the first time, Olivia saw him clearly in the bright afternoon sun. The muscles in his arms and shoulders were clearly defined beneath the buckskin, built by years of hard physical work. His hands were large and capable, moving with confidence and purpose. The merchant extended his hand. "Name's William Carter. We're mighty grateful for your help, mister." "Hayes Lockwood." He shook the offered hand briefly, then began unhitching the horses with efficient movements. "Just happened to be passing through." "Mighty fine shooting for just passing through," Carter observed. Hayes didn't respond to that, focused on his work. Olivia watched him, noting how he moved with deliberate care around the horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that calmed their nerves. There was nothing rushed or aggressive about him, despite the violence he'd just committed to save them. Within minutes, he had 2 horses freed from their traces. He helped the older woman mount one, handling her gently despite her considerable weight, then assisted the injured driver onto the other. The remaining passengers would walk, leading the horses and carrying what luggage they could manage. As the small group set off across the prairie toward Guthrie, Hayes took the lead, walking ahead with long strides that the others struggled to match. Olivia found herself toward the back of the group, still trying to process what had happened. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bandit's cold stare, felt his painful grip on her arm. She kept her eyes open. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they walked. Olivia's shoes, fine leather made for city streets back in Missouri, were not meant for hiking across rough terrain. She felt blisters forming, but didn't complain. After what Hayes Lockwood had done for them, the least she could do was walk to town without whining about sore feet. Hayes maintained his position at the front, occasionally glancing back to check on the group, but never stopping. Olivia noticed he moved almost soundlessly, his moccasins finding purchase on the uneven ground without the scuffing and stumbling that marked everyone else's progress. He carried his rifle with casual familiarity, scanning the horizon constantly. After about an hour, they crested a rise, and Guthrie came into view. The town sprawled across the prairie, a collection of wooden buildings and tents that had sprung up practically overnight after the land run of 1889. 5 years later, in this summer of 1894, Guthrie had grown into a proper town with 2 main streets, a railroad depot, several saloons, a general store, and the beginnings of more permanent stone construction. "Thank the Lord," the older woman breathed. I thought I might expire out here." Hayes led them straight to the livery stable, where he helped the driver and the woman dismount. The stable owner, a grizzled man named Tom, came out, wiping his hands on a rag. "Hayes, didn't expect to see you in town this week." Tom's eyes widened as he took in the bedraggled group. What happened? "Stage got hit by outlaws about 8 miles south. Need someone to ride out with a wagon to fetch the coach, get that axle fixed." "I'll get my boys on it." Tom looked at the injured driver. "Doc's office is 2 streets over. Let's get you seen to." While Tom organized the rescue of the stage, Hayes quietly began to slip away. Olivia saw him heading toward the edge of town and felt a sudden panic. She couldn't let him just disappear after what he'd done. "Wait." She hurried after him, ignoring the protests from her blistered feet. "Mr. Lockwood, please wait." He stopped and turned, those pale eyes settling on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Up close, she could see the small scars that marked his face and hands, evidence of a hard life. But there was nothing hard in the way he looked at her. Just a kind of careful gentleness. "Yes, madam. I wanted to thank you properly. You saved my life. All our lives." She realized she was wringing her hands and forced herself to stop. "I don't even know how to express my gratitude." "No need. Anyone would have done the same." "That's not true, and you know it." She met his eyes, though it took courage. "Those men were going to hurt us. Kill us, maybe. You risked your life for strangers." Hayes shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "Just glad I was nearby. Are you staying in town? Perhaps I could buy you a meal at least." He hesitated, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Not interest exactly, but not refusal either. "I usually camp outside town. Got supplies to buy, then I'll be heading back to my place in the hills." "Oh." She felt a strange disappointment. "I see. You're the new school teacher?" he asked suddenly. She blinked, surprised he'd remembered that detail from the chaos of the attack. "Yes, I'm Olivia Vaughn. I arrived from Missouri to teach at the school here." "Good. Town needs a school." He glanced toward the main street. "Boarding house is that way, run by Mrs. Patterson. She's honest, charges fair rates. Tell her I sent you." Before Olivia could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the livery stable. She stood there for a long moment, feeling oddly bereft. The man had saved her life, and she didn't even know if she'd ever see him again. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house turned out to be exactly where Hayes had indicated. A 2-story wooden building with a wide porch and clean windows. The proprietor was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and efficient manners. When Olivia mentioned Hayes Lockwood had recommended the place, Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "Hayes sent you? Well, any friend of his is welcome here. Let me show you to a room, dear. You look absolutely done in." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Olivia sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion and delayed fear. Her hands started shaking again, and she pressed them together hard. "I brought you some water and a cloth," Mrs. Patterson said, entering with a basin. "Those are nasty blisters on your feet. Let me help you with those shoes." As the older woman gently removed Olivia's shoes and began cleaning her bloodied feet, Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes. The kindness, after the terror of the attack, was almost overwhelming. "There now, you're safe," Mrs. Patterson soothed. Hayes Lockwood, was it? That man's a legend around these parts. Lives up in the Cimarron Hills, mostly keeps to himself. But when there's trouble, when folks need help, He appears like some kind of guardian angel. He saved us from bandits, Olivia said quietly. Not surprised. He's saved half the people in this town at one time or another. Pulled Tommy Richards out of a flash flood last spring. Tracked down Sarah Johnson's missing boy when he wandered off and got lost in the hills. Last winter he brought fresh meat to 3 families when their men were too sick to hunt. Mrs. Patterson wrapped Olivia's feet in clean bandages. But he never stays for thanks. Just does what needs doing and disappears back to his cabin. Why does he live alone in the hills, Mrs. Patterson's expression grew sad. That's his business to tell, if he chooses. All I'll say is some men carry burdens that make solitude preferable to company. That night, Olivia lay awake despite her exhaustion. Every time she drifted toward sleep, she'd jerk awake, heart pounding, thinking she heard gunshots or felt rough hands grabbing her. The darkness pressed in on her, and small sounds made her flinch. The building settling, footsteps in the hallway, a door closing somewhere downstairs. The door. She'd forgotten to lock it. Olivia climbed out of bed, wincing at the pain in her feet, and checked the lock. It was secure. She checked it again, and again. Finally, she dragged the chair from beside the washstand and wedged it under the doorknob. Only then could she return to bed, though sleep remained elusive. The next morning, despite her exhaustion, Olivia forced herself to rise early and prepare for her first day meeting with the school board. She dressed carefully in her best traveling suit, a navy blue ensemble with modest trim. Her hands trembled as she buttoned the jacket, and she had to stop and breathe deeply several times. The school board consisted of 3 men, Reverend Thompson, Mayor Dixon, and Mr. Harold Winters, who owned the general store. They met her at the small schoolhouse on the edge of town, a 1-room building with rows of wooden desks and a blackboard at the front. Miss Vaughn, we're delighted you've arrived safely, Reverend Thompson said, shaking her hand. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a gentle demeanor. We heard about the trouble with the stage. Terrible business. Yes, it was quite frightening, Olivia admitted. But thanks to Mr. Lockwood's intervention, we all survived. Hayes was there. Mayor Dixon's eyebrows rose. Lucky for you all. That man can shoot the wings off a fly at 200 yards. They showed her around the schoolhouse, discussing expectations and curriculum. Olivia had 15 students ranging from ages 6 to 14, children of farmers, shop owners, and railroad workers. School would begin the following Monday, giving her several days to prepare lessons and settle in. As they concluded the tour, a loud crash came from outside. One of the board members had accidentally knocked over a metal bucket, and it clanged against the wooden steps. Olivia jumped violently, her heart racing, hands flying up defensively. The 3 men stared at her. I'm sorry, she gasped, embarrassed by her overreaction. I'm still a bit shaken from yesterday. Perfectly understandable, Reverend Thompson said kindly. Perhaps you should take a few days to rest before beginning your duties. But Olivia shook her head firmly. She wouldn't let fear control her. No, I'll be fine. I need to keep busy. She spent the rest of that day organizing the schoolhouse, cleaning desks, and preparing lesson plans. The work helped steady her nerves, though every unexpected sound made her flinch. When a student's father arrived to introduce himself and slammed the door behind him in greeting, Olivia actually cried out and dropped the book she was holding. Sorry, miss, the man said, looking confused. Didn't mean to startle you. It's quite all right, Olivia said. But her hands shook as she gathered the scattered books. That evening, she returned to the boarding house, exhausted and discouraged. She'd always been calm and capable, but the attack had left her jumpy and nervous. How could she teach children when she couldn't even handle someone closing a door? She was picking at her dinner in the boarding house dining room when Hayes Lockwood walked in. He'd cleaned up since yesterday, his hair freshly washed and pulled back, wearing a clean buckskin shirt. But he still moved with that same quiet grace, his moccasined feet making no sound on the wooden floor. He nodded to Mrs. Patterson, spoke quietly with her for a moment, then took a seat at a table in the corner. Olivia's heart rate picked up, but this time from something other than fear. She found herself studying him covertly, noticing details she'd been too frightened to register yesterday. The strong line of his jaw, the way his large hands handled the fork and knife with surprising delicacy, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room, not with paranoia, but with awareness. Mrs. Patterson caught her looking and came over with a knowing smile. "You should go talk to him, dear. He won't bite." "I couldn't impose." "Nonsense. That man needs more human company, and you look like you could use a friend." Before Olivia could protest further, Mrs. Patterson had walked over to Hayes's table and said something quietly. He glanced toward Olivia, and she saw that flicker of something in his expression again. Then he nodded. Mrs. Patterson returned, beaming. "He'd be happy to have you join him for coffee after supper." Olivia's stomach fluttered with nervousness, but she nodded. When she'd finished her meal, she carried her coffee cup to Hayes's table with hands that only trembled slightly. "May I sit?" "Please." He half rose from his chair with old-fashioned courtesy, waiting until she was seated before settling back down. Up close, she could see gold flecks in those pale blue eyes, and faint lines at the corners that suggested he smiled more than his serious demeanor indicated. "How are you settling in?" he asked. "Well enough. The school is ready, and I'll begin teaching on Monday." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, seeking its warmth despite the summer heat. "Mr. Lockwood, I wanted to thank you again for what you did. I realize I barely expressed my gratitude yesterday. Hayes is fine, and like I said, no thanks needed. Nevertheless, you have it." She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I'm afraid I'm not handling the aftermath as well as I'd hoped. I keep jumping at every loud noise, and I can't seem to calm down." His expression softened with understanding. "That's normal after something like what you went through. Takes time for your body to realize the danger's past." "Has it happened to you?" "Yes, madam. More times than I care to count." There was a weight to those words, a suggestion of experiences she couldn't begin to imagine. She found herself wanting to know more, wanting to understand this quiet man who moved through the world like a ghost and saved people without seeking recognition. "Mrs. Patterson says you live in the hills," she ventured. "I do. Got a cabin about 10 miles northeast of here. Good hunting, good water, peaceful. Doesn't it get lonely?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment, his coffee forgotten. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I've found I'm not easy company for most folks. Easier to keep to myself." "You seem like perfectly good company to me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in that gaze made her breath catch. There was surprise there, and a kind of tentative hope that he quickly shuddered away. "You don't know me well enough to say that," he said, but his tone was gentle, not dismissive. At that moment, a couple entered the dining room, and the man let the door slam shut behind him. The sharp bang echoed through the room. Olivia gasped and jerked backward, her coffee cup clattering onto its saucer, hot liquid sloshing over the rim. Her heart hammered wildly, and for a moment she was back on the prairie with guns firing and rough hands grabbing her. Then she felt warmth on her hand. Hayes had reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, his touch firm and grounding. His eyes held hers steadily. "You're safe," he said quietly. "Just a door. You're safe, Olivia." The sound of her name on his lips pulled her back to the present. The panic receded slowly, her breathing evening out. She became aware of his hand on hers, the calloused strength of it, the gentle way he held her, as if she were something precious that might break. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." He didn't withdraw his hand immediately, and she found herself grateful for that continued contact, that anchor to the present moment. "Your body's remembering the danger. It'll pass in time." What if it doesn't? How can I teach children if I can't handle a door closing? You're stronger than you think. You got through yesterday, didn't you? Walked 8 miles on torn-up feet and never complained once. That takes strength. That's different. No, it's not. Same strength as different situation. Finally, he withdrew his hand, but slowly giving her time to adjust to the absence. Fear's a normal thing, Olivia. It's what keeps us alive. The trick is learning which fears serve you and which ones don't. She managed a shaky smile. And how do I learn that? One moment at a time. One door at a time. He stood, leaving coins on the table for his meal. I should be heading back before full dark. But I'll be in town again in a few days, picking up supplies. If you need anything before then, Mrs. Patterson knows how to get word to me. Olivia stood as well, not wanting him to leave, but having no good reason to ask him to stay. Thank you, Hayes, for everything. He nodded, then paused as if weighing his words carefully. You're going to be just fine here, Olivia. Give yourself time. She watched him leave, noting again that almost supernatural quietness in his movements. Even the door made barely a sound when he closed it behind him. The next several days passed in a blur of preparation. Olivia threw herself into readying the schoolhouse, determined to prove to herself and everyone else that she was capable of her duties. She met several of her future students and their parents, all of whom seemed pleasant and welcoming. But the nervousness remained. Every loud noise made her flinch. Every unexpected movement caught her eye. She found herself constantly on edge, exhausted from the vigilance her nervous system demanded. On Thursday, she was in Mr. Winters's general store, purchasing supplies for the schoolhouse, when a customer dropped a crate of canned goods. The crash was tremendous, tins rolling everywhere. Olivia cried out and stumbled backward, her vision tunneling, her breath coming in gasps. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up to find Hayes standing behind her, his expression concerned but calm. Easy, he said quietly. Just some dropped cans. You're all right. He'd appeared as if summoned by her distress, though she knew logically he must have simply been in the store already. His presence, solid and real, helped ground her. She focused on his face, on his steady breathing, and gradually her own panic subsided. Sorry, she muttered, embarrassed by the scene she was causing. Nothing to apologize for. Hayes kept one hand lightly on her arm, as if ready to steady her if needed, but not restraining her. Mr. Winters, Miss Vaughn's had a difficult week. Maybe give her a moment? Of course, the store owner said, quickly clearing the dropped cans. Miss Vaughn, please, sit down over here. Hayes guided her to a chair near the pot-bellied stove, though it wasn't lit in the summer heat. He crouched down beside her, bringing himself to her eye level rather than looming over her. Breathe, he said simply, slow and steady, in through your nose, out through your mouth. She followed his instructions, watching his chest rise and fall, matching her breathing to his. Slowly, the panic receded, leaving her shaky but more present. "How did you know?" she asked. "How did you know to do that?" "Had to learn myself, once upon a time." His eyes held shadows of old pain. When your mind's telling you you're still in danger, but you're not, sometimes you need an anchor. Something real to focus on. "And you're that for me?" The words came out before she could stop them. Something flickered in his expression, surprise and something else she couldn't quite name. "If that helps, then yes." Over the next week, Hayes seemed to appear whenever Olivia needed him, though never intrusively. She'd see him in town more often than Mrs. Patterson had suggested was his habit. He'd nod politely if their paths crossed, exchange a few quiet words, then be on his way. But somehow, his presence made the town feel safer. And gradually, Olivia found herself flinching less at unexpected noises. Not because they'd stopped startling her, but because she'd started associating the town with safety rather than danger. Hayes was part of that. On Sunday, the day before school was to begin, Olivia attended services at Reverend Thompson's church. The small wooden building was packed with townspeople, and she felt numerous curious eyes on her as the new schoolteacher. She took a seat near the back, smoothing her Sunday dress nervously. Just before the service began, Hayes slipped in through the back door. He moved so quietly that most people didn't notice, taking a seat in the very last pew. He dressed more formally than Olivia had seen him before, wearing dark trousers and a clean white shirt, his hair neatly tied back. But he still looked distinctly uncomfortable, like a wild creature confined in too small a space. Their eyes met across the church, and he gave her a small nod. She felt her heart lift, felt herself relax slightly. He was here. She was safe. After the service, as people milled about socializing, Olivia worked up the courage to approach him. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, clearly preparing to leave. "Hayes," she called softly. He turned, and his expression gentled when he saw her. "Morning, Olivia. Ready for tomorrow?" "As ready as I'll ever be, I suppose." She clasped her hands in front of her. "I wanted to thank you for being here. I know you probably don't attend services often." He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Mrs. Patterson might have mentioned you were nervous about tomorrow. Thought it might help if you saw a friendly face." The kindness of that gesture, the thoughtfulness of this man who barely knew her, brought tears to Olivia's eyes. "That's incredibly kind of you." "Not really, just seemed like the right thing." He glanced around at the crowd, clearly uncomfortable with all the people. "Walk back to the boarding house with you?" "I'd like that." They walked together through the dusty streets of Guthrie, Hayes naturally positioning himself between her and the street traffic. The morning sun was already hot, promising another scorching Oklahoma day. A few people nodded greetings as they passed, and Olivia noticed the respectful way they acknowledged Hayes, despite his reputation for being a loner. "The town likes you," she observed. "They tolerate me. There's a difference." "I don't think so. Mrs. Patterson speaks highly of you. So does Reverend Thompson. Even Mayor Dixon seemed impressed when I mentioned you'd saved us." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "I did some work for the town when I first came here 5 years back. Scouting, hunting, tracking when someone went missing. Folks remember that." "Where were you before here?" She felt him tense slightly at the question and immediately regretted asking. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "No, it's all right." But he didn't answer immediately, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I was a scout for the Army. stationed at Fort Supply. Before that, I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains, West Virginia coal country. My father was a miner. What brought you to Oklahoma? Needed a change, needed space. His jaw tightened. Some things happened that made Army life impossible for me. So I mustered out, drifted for a while, ended up here. Olivia sensed there was much more to that story, but she didn't push. They'd reached the boarding house, and she turned to face him on the porch steps. "Will you come by the school sometime?" she asked impulsively. "The children would probably enjoy meeting you." Hayes looked skeptical. "I'm not good with children, don't know what to say to them." "You're good with me, and I'm barely less terrified than a child right now." That surprised a soft laugh out of him, a sound she realized she'd never heard before. It transformed his face, made him look years younger. "That's different. You're an adult who's been through something traumatic. Children are just complicated. They're really not. They're honest and curious and accepting." She smiled at him. "Think about it, at least." "I'll think about it." He tipped his head to her in a gesture that was almost formal. "Good luck tomorrow, Olivia. You'll do fine." She watched him walk away down the street, his long strides carrying him quickly toward the edge of town. As always, people seemed to sense his presence and move aside, giving him space without even realizing they were doing it. That night, Olivia lay awake again, nervous about the first day of school. But this time, when anxiety threatened to overwhelm her, she thought about Hayes' steady presence, his calm voice telling her she was safe. She focused on that memory, used it as an anchor, and eventually drifted into uneasy sleep. The first day of school went better than Olivia had dared hope. The children were shy at first, watching her with curious eyes, but she quickly engaged them with an enthusiastic discussion about what they hoped to learn that year. By lunchtime, the initial awkwardness had faded, replaced by the comfortable rhythm of lessons and activities. Only once did she have a difficult moment, when one of the older boys, a rancher's son named Daniel, slammed his spelling book down on his desk in frustration. The sharp bang echoed through the schoolroom, and Olivia felt her breath catch, her vision narrow. But she managed to take a slow breath, focusing on the here and now. She was in a schoolhouse full of children. She was safe. The danger was past. "Daniel," she said calmly once she'd steadied herself, "I understand spelling can be frustrating, but slamming books won't help you learn. Let's work through these words together." The crisis passed. By the end of the day, Olivia felt cautiously optimistic that she could indeed do this job despite her lingering anxiety. As the last student headed home, she was organizing the classroom when she heard the door open. She turned, expecting a parent, and found Hayes standing in the doorway. "Thought I'd check how your first day went," he said quietly. Joy bloomed in Olivia's chest, warm and unexpected. "Hayes, it went well. Very well, actually." "Good, that's good." He stayed in the doorway, as if unsure whether he was welcome to enter further. "I won't keep you. Just wanted to make sure you were all right. I had one difficult moment, but I managed it." She set down her chalk and walked toward him. "You've been very kind to me, Hayes. I don't think I've properly expressed how much your help has meant." "You don't need to thank me every time we talk," he said. But there was warmth in his voice, a hint of amusement. "Perhaps not, but I want to." She hesitated, then decided to be bold. "Would you consider staying for a while? I could make us some tea and you could tell me more about your life in the hills. I'm curious about what that's like." Hayes looked torn, clearly wanting to accept, but also uncomfortable with the idea. Finally, curiosity seemed to win. All right, for a bit. Olivia had a small spirit lamp in the schoolhouse for making tea during lunch. She set water to boil while Hayes examined the classroom with interest, studying the books on the shelves, the maps on the walls, the children's slates lined up neatly. "This is nice," he said. "Good space for learning." "I think so. The previous teacher left good materials." She prepared the tea carefully, adding a bit of sugar to each cup. "Tell me about your cabin. What's it like living in the hills?" Hayes accepted the tea with a quiet word of thanks, then settled onto one of the larger desks, clearly more comfortable perching there than sitting in a child-sized chair. "It's a good cabin. Built it myself after I first came here. One room, but solid. Got a good well, a cleared area for a garden. Creek runs about 50 yards away, so fresh water's always close." "What do you do all day?" "Hunt, mostly. Trap in winter. I sell furs and meat in town for supplies. In summer, I collect wild herbs and plants, some of which I can sell to the doctor or the general store. Spend a lot of time just watching the land, learning its rhythms." "That sounds peaceful." "It is." He sipped his tea, and Olivia noticed the way his large hands dwarfed the delicate cup. "Quiet in a way that settles something inside me. After years of noise and chaos, the silence is healing." "The army," she said softly, understanding, among other things. He stared into his tea as if seeing something far away. "I saw things, did things, that changed me. Made it hard to be around people, hard to trust. The hills don't judge, don't demand anything." Olivia felt a surge of empathy for this man, who'd clearly been through his own traumas. "I think I'm beginning to understand that need for quiet. Since the attack, loud noises feel like violence, even when they're not." "Exactly." Hayes looked up at her, and there was something in his eyes that suggested he saw her clearly, understood what she was going through. "But you're doing well. Takes courage to face your fear every day, to keep showing up even when it's hard." "I don't feel courageous. I feel like I'm barely holding myself together." "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it." He set down his teacup with careful precision. "You're stronger than you think, Olivia. Stronger than most people I've known." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten with emotion. This man, who barely knew her, seemed to see something in her that she couldn't see in herself. They talked for another hour, the conversation flowing more easily than Olivia had expected. Hayes told her about tracking deer through the hills, about the eagles that nested in the high cliffs, about finding ancient arrowheads left by the tribes who'd lived on this land long before white settlement. Olivia found herself captivated by his stories, by the way his whole demeanor relaxed when he spoke of the wilderness. Eventually, the light began to fade, and Hayes stood. "Should get going before full dark. Long ride back." "You rode all the way from your cabin just to check on me?" Olivia asked, touched by the gesture. "It's not far, and I had business in town anyway." But the slight color in his cheeks suggested that wasn't entirely true. At the schoolhouse door, Olivia touched his arm gently. "Thank you for coming, Hayes. For everything." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that made Olivia's breath catch. Hayes seemed to feel it too, because he tensed slightly, his eyes searching hers. "Olivia?" he said quietly, then seemed to lose track of what he'd meant to say. "Yes?" "I." He took a careful step back. putting distance between them. "I'm glad you're settling in well. You'll do good things here." Then he was gone, moving down the steps and into the gathering dusk with that ghostly quietness that was so characteristic of him. Olivia stood in the doorway, watching him disappear, her hand still warm from where it had touched his arm. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Hayes would come to town every few days, ostensibly to sell meat or furs, to purchase supplies. But he always found time to stop by the schoolhouse, to check on Olivia. Sometimes he'd arrive just as school was letting out, and the children would surround him with questions and excitement. Despite his claims of being bad with children, he'd answer their questions with patient kindness, telling them about animal tracks or showing them interesting stones he'd found in the hills. Olivia watched these interactions with growing warmth. Hayes had a gentleness about him that belied his imposing size and clear capability for violence. He never raised his voice, never made sudden movements that might startle. Even when rambunctious boys got too loud or rowdy, he'd simply lower his voice, and they'd quiet down to hear him, drawn in by his calm presence. And always, he moved with that remarkable quietness. Doors never slammed when Hayes was near. He opened and closed them with barely a whisper of sound. His footsteps were silent. Even his breathing seemed controlled and measured. Olivia began to realize he was doing it for her. He'd noticed her flinching at loud noises and had unconsciously, or perhaps very consciously, adjusted his own behavior to avoid startling her. The realization made her heart ache with affection for this thoughtful man. One afternoon in late September, Hayes arrived at the school just as a thunderstorm was rolling in. Olivia was at the door watching dark clouds gather on the horizon, worry creasing her brow. "Students all get home before the storm?" Hayes asked, appearing beside her with his characteristic silence. She jumped slightly, but not from fear, just surprise at his sudden presence. "Yes, they left about 30 minutes ago. But I'm concerned about walking back to the boarding house in this." As if to emphasize her point, thunder rumbled in the distance. Olivia tensed, but didn't panic. The thunder wasn't as sharp as gunfire, and she'd gotten better at distinguishing between the two. "I can give you a ride," Hayes offered. "Horse won't mind the storm, and it's not far." "I wouldn't want to impose." "You're not." He studied her face. "You're doing better with unexpected sounds." "I am. Thanks to you in part." She met his eyes. "You're very careful around me. I've noticed. You never make loud noises, never move suddenly where I can't see you." Hayes looked slightly embarrassed. Seemed like the right thing to do. "It's more than that. It's kindness and consideration." Impulsively, she reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you." His hand turned under hers, his calloused palm warm against hers. For a moment they stood there, hands clasped, something unspoken passing between them. Then the storm broke, rain suddenly sheeting down, and the moment passed. "Come on," Hayes said, gently releasing her hand. "Let's get you home dry." He helped her onto his horse, a steady gelding named Thunder, then swung up behind her with effortless grace. Olivia found herself very aware of his solid presence behind her. His arms on either side of her as he took the reins, his chest against her back. He radiated warmth and strength. "Hold on," he said quietly near her ear, and she felt his breath stir her hair. The ride to the boarding house took only minutes, but Olivia found herself wishing it were longer. There was something deeply comforting about being held safe in Hayes's arms, protected from the storm and the world. When they arrived and he helped her down, she felt the loss of his warmth immediately. "Thank you again," she said, having to raise her voice slightly over the drumming rain. Anytime." Hayes tipped his hat to her, water streaming off the brim. "Stay dry, Olivia." She watched him ride away into the storm, a solitary figure heading back toward the hills and his isolated cabin. A strange melancholy settled over her as she watched him go. That evening, sitting in her room as the storm raged outside, Olivia finally admitted to herself what she'd been denying for weeks. She was developing feelings for Hayes Lockwood, deep feelings that went far beyond gratitude for her rescue. She loved the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence. She loved his gentleness, his thoughtfulness, the way he seemed to truly see and understand her fears without judgment. She loved the glimpses he gave her of his inner world, the wilderness he carried in his soul. But what could come of such feelings? Hayes was a mountain man, a solitary soul who'd made it clear he preferred isolation to company. She was a schoolteacher, committed to this town and these children. Their lives seemed to exist in different worlds. Still, she couldn't help but hope that perhaps those worlds might find a way to merge. As October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and brilliant fall colors to the Oklahoma landscape, Hayes's visits became even more frequent. He'd stop by the school almost daily now, sometimes bringing fresh meat for Mrs. Patterson's kitchen, sometimes just checking in on Olivia. The townspeople began to notice. Mrs. Patterson commented on it with knowing smiles. Some of the students' mothers made gentle teasing remarks about Olivia's mountain man protector. Even Reverend Thompson mentioned how nice it was to see Hayes spending more time in town. Olivia felt herself blushing at these comments, but didn't deny the attachment. How could she, when her heart leaped every time she saw Hayes's tall figure approaching the schoolhouse? One Saturday, Hayes surprised her by inviting her to take a ride into the hills. "Thought you might like to see the cabin," he said almost shyly. "Get out of town for a bit. It's beautiful up there this time of year." Olivia accepted eagerly, both curious about his home and delighted at the prospect of spending more time with him. She dressed practically in a split riding skirt borrowed from Mrs. Patterson and met Hayes at the livery stable early in the morning. He'd brought a gentle mare for her to ride, a pretty chestnut named Autumn. "She's got smooth gaits and a calm temperament," he assured her as he helped Olivia mount. "Won't spook its shadows." The ride out of town took them northeast, into gradually rising terrain. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills covered in oak and hickory trees, ablaze with fall color. Hayes led the way, but he constantly looked back to check on Olivia, making sure she was comfortable and keeping pace. They talked as they rode, conversation flowing easily. Hayes pointed out animal tracks, named the birds that called from the trees, showed her a spot where beaver had built a dam across a small stream. Olivia found herself enchanted by his knowledge of this landscape, by the way he moved through it like he belonged there. After about 2 hours, they crested a hill, and Olivia saw the cabin below. It sat in a small clearing backed by a rocky outcropping and facing east to catch the morning sun. Built of notched logs, it was small but solid, with a good stone chimney and a covered porch along the front. A garden plot, now mostly harvested, occupied a cleared area to one side. The promised creek sparkled in the distance, winding through the trees. "Hayes, it's beautiful," Olivia said sincerely. He looked pleased by her reaction. "Come on, I'll show you inside." The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. One large room served as kitchen, living area, and bedroom, with a sleeping platform built into one corner. A cast-iron stove provided heat and cooking capability. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and tools. Everything was meticulously organized and clean. What caught Olivia's attention, though, were the books. An entire shelf was devoted to them. a surprising collection ranging from natural history to poetry to classic literature. "You're a reader," she said with delight, examining the titles. "Not much else to do in winter when you're snowed in," Hayes said, looking somewhat self-conscious. "Started collecting books after I moved here. Helps pass the long nights." Olivia pulled out a worn copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass, noting the careful bookmark placement. "This is one of my favorites." "Mine too." Hayes moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "There's a line I love. I exist as I am. That is enough. Took me a long time to believe that, but I'm getting there." Olivia looked up at him, moved by the vulnerability in that admission. "I think you're more than enough, Hayes Lockwood." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a lowering of defenses. "Olivia," he said quietly, and she heard a question in her name. "Yes?" Instead of answering with words, Hayes raised one hand and gently tugged a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was feather-light, as if he feared she might startle. Olivia's breath caught, but not from fear, from anticipation. "I've been wanting to do this for weeks," he admitted, his voice rough. "But I wasn't sure if you'd welcome it." "I would," she whispered. "I do." Hayes lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle, almost tentative. His hand cupped her cheek with infinite care, his thumb stroking her skin softly. Olivia leaned into the kiss, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palms, could feel the restrained strength in his large frame. He was holding back, she realized, being so careful with her. When they finally separated, both breathing slightly harder, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "I've never felt this way before," he admitted. "Never wanted anyone the way I want you. But I don't know if I can be what you need. I'm not an easy man, Olivia. I carry things, dark things. We all carry things," she said softly. "You've seen mine. You've helped me through my fears without judgment. Let me do the same for you." Hayes pulled back enough to look into her eyes, searching for something. Whatever he found there seemed to reassure him, because he nodded slowly. "I'd like that. I'd like to try." They spent the rest of the day at the cabin, talking and sharing pieces of themselves they'd kept hidden. Hayes told her about his childhood in the coal mines, about his father's death in a collapse when Hayes was 15, about joining the army to escape that life, only to find himself in the middle of the conflict with the Apache, forced to do things that haunted him still. "I was good at it," he said quietly, staring into the small fire he'd built in the stove to make them lunch. "The tracking, the fighting, too good. They used me for things I'm not proud of, sent me after people, made me do things that weren't right." Olivia took his hand, holding it firmly. "What made you leave?" "We were ordered to clear out a camp, told it was a hostile war party." His jaw clenched. "It wasn't. It was families. Old people, women, children. I refused the order. Nearly got court-martialed for it. They let me muster out instead, but the damage was done. I couldn't be around people after that, couldn't trust orders or authority, came here to hide." "You didn't hide," Olivia said fiercely. "You built a life. You helped people. You saved me and everyone on that stage. That's not hiding, Hayes. That's healing." He looked at her with such gratitude, such vulnerability, that it made her throat tight. "You make me want to believe that." "Then believe it." She squeezed his hand. "We all have things in our past we wish we could change. But those things don't define us. What we do now, how we treat people now, that's what matters." Hayes pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. Olivia melted into his strength, feeling safer than she had since before the attack. As the afternoon sun began its descent, they rode back toward Guthrie, but something had fundamentally shifted between them. They were no longer just two damaged people offering each other comfort. They were something more, something with potential and possibility. Over the following weeks, as October gave way to November, Hayes and Olivia spent every possible moment together. He'd meet her after school, and they'd walk through town together, or ride out into the hills if the weather permitted. She learned to read his silences, to understand the subtle shifts in his expression that indicated his mood. He learned her fears and triggers, learned how to ground her when anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. The townspeople watched their growing relationship with approval. Mrs. Patterson was especially delighted, claiming she'd known from the start that they were perfect for each other. "That man's been alone too long," she told Olivia one evening. "Needs someone like you to bring him back to the world of the living." But it wasn't just Hayes who was healing. Olivia found that her anxiety was lessening as well. The nightmares came less frequently. Loud noises still made her jump, but she recovered more quickly. She no longer checked the locks on her door multiple times each night. Being with Hayes made her feel safe in a way that went beyond physical protection. He accepted all of her, including the frightened parts, without trying to rush her healing or minimize her fears. That acceptance gave her the freedom to heal at her own pace. In mid-November, winter arrived early with a cold snap and the first dusting of snow. Hayes appeared at the boarding house one evening with a thick buffalo robe. "For you," he said, handing it to Olivia. "Gets cold in these buildings at night. This'll keep you warm." Olivia ran her hands over the soft fur, touched by the gift. "Hayes, this is too much." "No, it's not. I want you comfortable." He looked almost embarrassed. "Besides, I've got 2 more at the cabin. Can spare one for you." "Thank you." She stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek, feeling his skin warm under her lips. "You take such good care of me." "Always will," he said quietly. And she knew he meant it as a promise. As winter deepened, Hayes spent more time in town, taking a room at the boarding house rather than making the long, cold ride back to his cabin every day. He helped with odd jobs around town, using his considerable strength to assist with repairs and construction projects. The mayor hired him to help with security, concerned about increased bandit activity in the area. Olivia loved having him nearby, loved being able to see him every day. They'd take meals together, sit by the fire in the boarding house parlor reading aloud to each other, walk through the snowy streets bundled in warm coats and scarves. On Christmas Eve, Hayes asked Olivia to take a walk with him despite the cold. They bundled up and headed toward the edge of town, where the lights from buildings gave way to the vast darkness of the prairie. Stars blazed overhead, brilliant in the clear winter air. "Olivia," Hayes began, then paused, seeming to gather his courage. "These past few months with you have been the best of my life. You've made me believe I can be part of something again, part of a community, part of a life that matters." "You've done the same for me," she said softly. "You've helped me heal, helped me find my strength again." Hayes took both her hands in his. "I know I'm not what anyone would call a good prospect. I'm a mountain man with a dark past and not much to offer beyond a cabin in the hills and whatever I can hunt or trap. But I love you, Olivia Vaughn. I love you more than I thought I could love anything or anyone." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes, joy and love overwhelming her. "Oh, Hayes, I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me. I know you've got your teaching, and I'd never ask you to give that up. But maybe we could find a way to make it work. Maybe I could build us a house closer to town, somewhere you could get to the school easily, but we'd still have space and peace." "Yes," Olivia said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Hayes. I love your strength and your gentleness, your quiet wisdom, the way you move through the world like you're part of it rather than fighting against it. I want to spend my life with you." Hayes pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion he'd kept carefully controlled until now. Olivia melted into him, feeling his strength, his love, his absolute commitment to her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "I'll make you happy," he promised. "I'll spend every day of my life making sure you're safe and loved and happy. I know you will, and I'll do the same for you." They married on New Year's Day, 1895, in Reverend Thompson's small church with most of the town in attendance. Olivia wore a simple blue dress, and Hayes had gotten a proper suit for the occasion, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable in it. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. After the wedding, true to his word, Hayes began building them a house on a piece of land about 2 miles from town, close enough that Olivia could easily reach the school, but far enough to give them the peace and privacy Hayes needed. He worked on it through the winter and spring, and Olivia would often come after school to watch him work, marveling at his skill and strength. The house he built was beautiful, a proper 2-room cabin with a sleeping loft, large windows to let in light, and a generous porch. He built Olivia bookshelves for all her teaching materials and his collected books. He built a root cellar for food storage and a small barn for the horses. They moved into the new house in April, and Olivia had never been happier. She loved waking up next to Hayes every morning, loved the quiet domestic life they built together. He'd make breakfast while she prepared lessons. She'd read aloud to him in the evenings while he worked on carving or repairing tack. They'd take walks together through the emerging spring landscape, and he'd teach her about the plants and animals, about reading the weather and understanding the rhythms of the land. And always, Hayes was careful with her. He never made loud noises if he could help it. He never moved suddenly in ways that might startle her. Even when she told him she was doing better, that he didn't need to be so careful anymore, he couldn't seem to help himself. It had become part of how he loved her, this quiet gentleness that made her feel safe and cherished. In June, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous to tell Hayes, unsure how he'd react to the news. But when she finally worked up the courage, his face transformed with joy. A baby. He placed his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby?" "In February, the doctor thinks." Hayes pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I'm going to be a father," he said, wonder in his voice. "I never thought I'd get to have this. A family. A real family." Over the following months, Hayes became even more protective than before, if that was possible. He insisted Olivia not overwork herself, made sure she ate well and rested often. He started teaching summer school so she could take a break from the constant demands of teaching. In late February, 1896, on a cold, snowy night, Olivia went into labor. Hayes rode through the storm to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Patterson, then stayed by Olivia's side through the long hours of labor, holding her hand, whispering encouragement. Their son was born just before dawn, a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair in his father's blue eyes. Hayes held him with such tenderness, such awe, that Olivia felt tears streaming down her face. "He's perfect," Hayes whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Samuel, after Hayes's father who died in the mines. Little Samuel proved to be a calm, watchful baby who rarely cried. Hayes was a devoted father, getting up for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing softly to his son in the dark hours before dawn. Watching Hayes with their baby, seeing this strong, capable man transform into the gentlest of fathers, Olivia felt her heart expand with love. This was the life she'd never dared dream of when she'd boarded that stagecoach nearly 2 years ago. She'd come to Oklahoma to teach, to build a modest life as a schoolteacher. Instead, she'd found love, healing, and a family beyond anything she could have imagined. As spring turned to summer, Olivia returned to teaching part-time, leaving Samuel with Mrs. Patterson during school hours. Hayes continued his hunting and trapping, but now he took contracts closer to home, never wanting to be away from his family for more than a day or two. One evening in late summer, they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Oklahoma sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Samuel slept peacefully in Olivia's arms, while Hayes had his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about that day?" Olivia asked quietly. "The day you saved us from those bandits?" "Sometimes." Hayes pressed a kiss to her temple. "Best thing I ever did, because it brought me you. I used to have nightmares about it, about the violence, the fear. But I don't anymore. You know what I dream about now?" "What?" "This, us, the life we've built. Sometimes I dream we're old, sitting on this same porch, watching our grandchildren play in the yard." Hayes smiled, a genuine expression of contentment. "I like that dream. Think we can make it come true?" "I think we already are." Over the years that followed, they did exactly that. Olivia continued teaching, becoming beloved by generations of Guthrie children. Hayes became a respected member of the community, serving occasionally as a deputy when bandits or trouble threatened, but mostly living the quiet life he'd always wanted with his family. They had 3 more children over the years. A daughter named Mary arrived in 1898, followed by twin boys, James and Joseph, in 1901. Their house echoed with laughter and noise, the sounds of a family living fully and loving deeply. Hayes never lost his careful quietness around Olivia, even years after her anxiety had largely healed. It had become simply part of how he moved through the world, this gentle consideration. And Olivia never stopped appreciating it, never stopped feeling grateful for a man who'd seen her fear and responded not with impatience or dismissal, but with understanding and accommodation. As their children grew, Hayes taught them about the land, about respecting nature and understanding the wilderness. He taught them to move quietly, to observe rather than disturb, to be considerate of others' feelings and fears. They learned from his example what it meant to be strong and gentle at the same time. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who became a doctor, serving the growing town of Guthrie. Mary became a teacher like her mother, taking over the school when Olivia finally retired. James and Joseph started a ranch together, using the skills their father had taught them about reading the land and managing livestock. In 1920, on a warm summer evening, much like the one 25 years earlier when they'd talked about their dreams, Hayes and Olivia sat on their porch surrounded by their grown children and 7 grandchildren. The house Hayes had built still stood strong, weathered by time, but solid. "Tell us again how you met Grandma," little Sarah, Samuel's daughter, begged. Hayes looked at Olivia, and even after all these years, she saw the same love in his eyes that had been there that Christmas Eve when he'd proposed. "Well," Hayes began, pulling Sarah onto his lap, "your grandmother was the bravest woman I'd ever met. She came all the way to Oklahoma Territory on a stagecoach to teach children, and when bad men tried to hurt her, she didn't give up or give in to fear. And Grandpa saved everyone with his amazing shooting," Sarah added, having heard the story many times. The shooting was easy, Hayes said softly, his eyes never leaving Olivia's face. The hard part was finding the courage to love someone, to let someone into my life when I'd spent so long alone. Your grandmother taught me how to do that. She taught me that being strong doesn't mean being hard, and being gentle doesn't mean being weak. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, as moved by his words now as she would have been decades ago. And your grandfather taught me that healing is possible, that fear doesn't have to control us, and that the right person will understand our wounds and help us carry them. As the sun set over the Oklahoma plains, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors it had 25 years before, Olivia took Hayes's hand in hers. His palm was still calloused from work, his grip still strong and sure. But there was a gentleness in that touch, a tenderness that had never wavered in all their years together. No regrets? Hayes asked quietly, a question he'd asked many times over the years. Not a single one, Olivia answered, as she always did. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. You did the same for me. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. You took a broken mountain man and made him whole again. You were never broken. You just needed someone to see you clearly. Their grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Their children talked and shared stories on the porch steps. And Hayes and Olivia sat together in the home he'd built, in the life they'd created, surrounded by the evidence of their love. It hadn't always been easy. There had been hard times, lean winters, illnesses, and losses. But through it all, they'd had each other. Hayes had remained her rock, her steady presence who moved through life with quiet strength. And Olivia had remained his anchor, his connection to humanity and community, the one who'd shown him he could be both wild and domestic, both strong and gentle. In the years that followed, as they aged together, their love only deepened. When Hayes's hair turned silver and his movements slowed, Olivia loved him no less. When her eyes grew weak and her hands trembled with age, Hayes cared for her with the same patient tenderness he'd shown that very first day. In the winter of 1935, Hayes fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts, he weakened quickly. Olivia never left his side, holding his hand, telling him stories of their life together, reminding him of all they'd built. I love you, Hayes whispered one night, his voice weak but his eyes still holding that same clarity, that same devotion. Every day with you was a gift. I love you too, Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. You were my everything. Not afraid? He asked. And she knew he wasn't talking about death. He was asking about her old fear, the one that had brought them together. Never when you're with me, she said truthfully. And it was true. Even now, facing the loss of her beloved husband, she wasn't afraid. How could she be, when he'd spent 40 years showing her that love could conquer fear? Hayes passed quietly that night, his hand in hers, a peaceful expression on his weathered face. And though Olivia grieved deeply, she also felt profound gratitude for the life they'd shared. She lived another 5 years after Hayes's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She told them stories of their grandfather, of the quiet mountain man who'd moved through life like wind, who'd seen a frightened woman and chosen gentleness over aggression, understanding over judgment. When Olivia finally passed in the spring of 1940, it was peacefully in her sleep. Her family buried her next to Hayes in the Guthrie Cemetery, under a stone that read, "Together always." Their great-grandchildren would grow up hearing the story of Hayes and Olivia, about the mountain man who saved the schoolteacher, who moved quiet as wind and never made her afraid. About how they built a life together based on understanding, patience, and deep, abiding love. The house Hayes built still stood for decades after, a testament to his craftsmanship and the solid foundation of their love. And in Guthrie, Oklahoma, their story became legend. Not the dramatic tale of rescue and bandits, though that was part of it, but the quieter, more profound story of two damaged people who found healing in each other, who proved that true strength lies in gentleness, and that the deepest love is shown through small, daily acts of consideration and care. Years later, a young woman visiting Guthrie heard the story and was moved by it. She asked an elderly resident, one of Hayes and Olivia's great-grandchildren, what the secret had been to their remarkable love. The old woman smiled, her eyes distant with memory. My great-grandfather understood something fundamental about love. He understood that when someone is hurting, when they're afraid, the most powerful thing you can do is make them feel safe. Not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through consistent, quiet consideration. He never made loud noises around her. He never moved suddenly. He made himself predictable and gentle, a safe harbor in a world that had shown her violence. And in doing so, he gave her the space to heal. And what did she give him? The young woman asked. She saw him, really saw him. Not as a dangerous man or a violent man, despite his capability for violence. She saw his gentleness, his wounded soul, his desperate need for connection. She accepted all of him, the darkness and the light, and loved him without trying to change him. She gave him a reason to come down from his mountain and rejoin the world. It was, the old woman concluded, a love story for the ages. Not because it was dramatic or turbulent, but because it was deep and true and lasting. Because two people chose each other every single day, in small ways and large, and built something beautiful from their shared brokenness. And that, perhaps, is the most profound love story of all. Not the one that burns hot and fast, but the one that glows steady and warm through all the seasons of life. The love that says, I see your fear and I will be gentle. The love that says, I see your darkness and I will not run. The love that moves quiet as wind but strong as mountains, that never frightens but always protects, that asks nothing but gives everything. Hayes and Olivia's love was that kind of love, and it echoed through generations long after they were gone.